Welcome everybody. Good to see so many people here from all over the place. My name is Mikey Manna. I'm the Executive Director of afikra. I'll be your host tonight. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Huda AbiFares, who is a typographer, a writer, a researcher, a graphic designer, and educator. She is the founder and director of the Khatt Foundation. Huda holds a PhD from Leiden University, MFA from Yale University, and a BFA from RISD in Rhode Island. She's the author of many books, among them Arabic Typography, a comprehensive source book, Experimental Arabic Type, and Arabic Type Design for Beginners, and has taught at design institutions, including AUB and American University of Dubai. Huda, welcome to afikra Conversations.
Thank you. I'm freezing here. I don't know. I hope you guys in the Arab world are in warmer places than here.
It depends on your AC situation. But so, Huda, I have a question for you. And I think I know the answer, but this will lead directly into my second question. Are you calling from Amsterdam right now?
No, I'm actually in the supposedly south of France.
Okay, but you typically live in Holland, right?
Yeah, I typically live in Holland, but this year has been, like what normally you go to for holidays has become your home away from home, because it's much more comfortable to be working and living in the countryside than in congested cities. So I'm at the moment not at home, or in my second home.
Yeah. So
third home, whatever.
Okay, so I was about to say that, maybe third home. And the reason why I wanted to talk about that is because you've spent a lot of your life in second and third homes, so to speak. How much do you think that sort of influenced the way you think about your career and design, maybe at large?
Yeah, well, I don't think these places as second home. I'm just more like, and sometimes it's become such a habit to move from one place to another by choice. I was never forced out of any place, so it's not displacement per se, but it's more my interest to explore the world. As a kid, I always wanted to do that, and I got the opportunity to do it as a grown-up. And I think it not only influences me as a designer, but also as a person. I feel that, it has had a great influence on me in my work, in the sense that I feel that every time I get comfortable somewhere, whether in my work or in my life, I have to move on. And it's this, this, what people always worry, what a lot of people, I think, are constantly busy with is how they define themselves and their identity, and how they want to feel like they belong somewhere. And I feel that if you move sufficiently, you belong everywhere. So I think the world is my home.
When did you? It is great. You were born in Beirut. When did you leave Lebanon and sort of leave the region?
I was 20 years old, so not a child really, but young enough to be, young enough to kind of move on. And
is that when you went to? That's when you went to RISD at the time?
Yes, that's when I went to RISD, and then I lived in Boston for a year, and then I went to Yale, and then after that I moved to Holland for a few months, and then I went to Canada, and then I returned to Holland, and then I decided that I really like living in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
But then at some point I felt like I needed to go back to the Middle East and contribute somehow to my experience, in a way, and also reconnect a little bit with old friends and family, and then I feel when I went back to live in Beirut, I felt like Beirut was too small and that the Arab world was bigger and richer. So I was very curious to explore East, actually. So and I feel that,
No, go ahead.
And I feel that, because you are always a foreigner somewhere in some ways, you can become exotic, and people always ask you questions you have no answers for. So they ask you about things that you normally would take for granted in your own culture, but then all of a sudden you're pressured to kind of like become an ambassador of sorts. So when I went back to teach in AUB, I realized that, you know, even though I grew up in Beirut, I didn't grow up in Beirut as a designer. So I had to kind of teach myself what it means to be a designer in Beirut and what it means to be an Arab designer. So, you know, my influences of people that have like inspired me and taught me and have varied. So I've had teachers that were Lebanese, like that encouraged me and helped me kind of like see the world outside of Lebanon. Somebody like Leila Musfi, who's now, who was for the longest time the director of the graphic design program in AUB. And so it was really nice to go back and be part of the faculty and to be kind of like all of a sudden the relationship changed to colleague and friends. And I think that when I studied abroad, my teachers were from everywhere. They were Swiss, they were Polish, they were American. And for me, all of a sudden, you know, I felt that what is important is to find, you know, the human connection between all of us, because even though every culture has its identity or some kind of particularities, I wouldn't call it even identity, it's also the things that are in common that are really interesting. And it's this balance between what is common and what is different that, yes, I find to this day quite exciting. I also find it exciting to see, you know, what is it that attracts you, like this idea of what is exotic. Well, sometimes you are exotic, but so sometimes other people around you are exotic to you. And even though we always, you know, like nowadays, we are kind of aware of other cultures because of media and social media, but we really don't understand another culture until we live there, I think. So, and until we deal with it on a deeper level.
Okay, so I want to read this quote for those, for the people who aren't seeing the screen and those listening to the podcast. I listened to an interview you gave recently, and you said typography and scripts in general, writing systems, are loaded cultural material, the visualizing of thought, the visualizing of difference. So I want to ask you, as I've looked at your work, it seems like difference and similarity is at the core of how you think about how you think about the written form.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that was so evident to you earlier on in your career, or is that something that you are constantly learning and sort of learning on a deeper level? Or was this evidently evident to you as you were working on your PhD, as you were doing your work at RISD, and were you thinking, wow, this is the lack of Arabic script has been holding me back? And how soon into your career did you realize that you needed to do the work that you are currently doing?
It's much later, actually. I think like I said, I grew up in, you know, when you grow up in Beirut, you constantly see all these scripts together. But if you're not a designer, you don't think about them. You know, they're like, you know, they're around you. They exist. They are there. They're a fact. But then and then I studied in an American program, so we never really talked about these things. And I studied 2 years in LAU in LAU in Beirut. But it was a very basic, you know, the beginning of my design study, and then I went to the US. So all my education and all my work was up until I returned to Beirut to teach. And that was in the 90s, was totally in a European or American context. So the Arabic script was something that, of course, I appreciated, but in a very superficial way. I never had to really work with it. I never had to like come across, you know, this problematic. And when I went back to Beirut to teach, and then I realized, yeah, it's very odd to be teaching typography and not like talk about Arabic. And we're going to have, you know, my students are going to go out and work as designers in this field. And I remember the first publication I had to design, the technology at the time was also segregated. Like if you had to do Arabic book, you have a specific software with it comes specific fonts that to my eyes were okay, well, and some were good, some were less good. And then you had, on the other hand, you know, the software to make Arabic, to make like an English book. But if you want to make a book that's in 2 languages, which was often the case needed, it was very weird. So the first book I did was actually, I designed, you know, part of it on one software and the other part on the other software. And it was like, you know, trying to like get your head around of how to bring them together. And then you realize there's a disconnect because in reality, you know, especially if you're in Beirut, people speak like, you know, French, English, and Arabic all mixed up. Everything, all the signs are bilingual. And then after that, I went to Dubai, it's even more so. And then you think there's a disconnect between technology and like the way we look at those letter forms as if they come from complete different planets. And then we still have to use them together. And when we speak, we use them fluently together. I mean, there is no problem of, you know, taking an English word, making it sound Arabic and vice versa. So I thought that was an interesting problem, but it was kind of scary to undertake because, as you know, with the Arabic script, especially at that time, the technology was not, you know, very flexible. There wasn't so many type designers that were specialized, very few actually. So it was a kind of like, yeah, like you think, where do we start from? And that was, you know, that was also the reason that I felt that maybe it's good to create a platform where these, you know, this research, these questions, these problematics can come up. But prior to that, I thought, yeah, if something, you know, I learned it once from an old teacher of mine, that, you know, if things that you want in this world don't exist, you just have to make them. And it's a very nice idea and very positive. Sometimes, you know, like now that I'm gray and older, I think if they don't exist in the world for so long, it's probably because they're not such a good idea. But never mind. Well, sometimes you have to do what you like to do. Never mind if it's a good idea. So for lack of information also was not, there was not information enough about Arabic typography. So if you're teaching or you're trying to do something, you know, where do you start? You had no guidelines. And my solution was to do that research and like actually find out why, you know, why it's not there.
The older, grayer professors at the time, were they cautioning you? Were they saying, Huda, don't waste your time. Nobody wants this. The technology isn't there. It's a waste of your time. It's not there for a reason. Were there sort of negative voices or cautionary tales being told to you?
No, not really, because I don't think, I mean, I wasn't a student by that time. I was actually the teacher.
Yeah.
But I'm also not the kind of, you know, if somebody told me that, I probably would have like immediately wanted to do it. I'm just a contrarian. Please tell me I can't do it so I can start. No, I had actually, when I was doing a research, so I did, you know, this whole thing, like trying to find out answers, and I ended up making my first book, which was quite, you know, an endeavor. Like it took 3 years finding information. I wasn't, you know, like it wasn't a PhD, it wasn't funded, it was nothing. It was just something like I wanted to do. And in one library, it was actually in Leiden University, the head of the Oriental Library at the time, Dr. Jan-Just Witkam, who eventually became my promoter, my PhD supervisor at Leiden, and down the years, you know, we became friends after this kind of encounter. But he really helped me look at what was available in the library. And he made this very funny joke, was talking about contrarian. He said, you know, nobody's ever done research on Arabic typography and lived to see it.
Yeah.
The disadvantage of being in the countryside is the internet here is sometimes,
okay, that's okay.
Glitchy.
So I want to move on just for a second. So speaking about maybe not living to see the fruits of your labor, I want to read the mission statement or the about sentence from the Khatt Foundation website. It says, "We are a cultural foundation dedicated to advancing Arabic typography and design research in the Middle East, North Africa, and their diasporas. Building cross-cultural creative networks is an important instrument for this end."
Yeah.
I want to understand two parts of that phrase. One, why is it a foundation? All right. That's the first. And the second is, was it always conceived to be a cross-cultural a platform focused on the cross-cultural exchange? Because that is, both of those things are absolutely essential in understanding the work of the foundation. But why was it conceived? Why isn't it a think tank? Why isn't it a company? I mean, why was it conceived in that way?
Well, to start with, and that's the first part of the question, is I wanted it to be not connected to any academic institution, not connected to any governmental institution. And then I felt like it's a much better place for me personally to operate in a kind of freer structure that is an independent non-profit. So why it's not a company? Because it's non-profit. We don't want to make money on it. I felt that it was important that it functioned outside of limitations that come with, like huge policies, huge cultural policies, if it was governmental, or huge economic reasons, if it was within a kind of commercial context. And with academia, it also had to relate to the vision of the institution, and then also the educational program. So this freedom for me was important, because then you can explore things, you can do projects that were more, collaborative, explorative, not worry whether, there's a perfect outcome in the end. It's more about bringing things and bringing people together to experiment, in a kind of safe and free environment. Now, why is it, that was the reason why it's a foundation. And why is it cross-cultural? Again, because for me, I think from my experience, what we still, and it's getting worse actually. I mean, you only have to read about what's happening in the world, in the Middle East, and at this very moment, where you have more divisions between people, and it's more. And I felt that, through design and through working on scripts, especially writing systems that are very much identifying of cultures, that you can open up a discussion, that people enter into a safe conversation and into a safe collaboration, and they work together and to produce something that is valuable, that is pragmatic, that is fun, that is and that there's a kind of learning in this process. So you learn from another culture and they learn from you, and you open up, this knowledge, and you take away this fear and this kind of racism and this kind of protectionist ideas about what culture is. I mean, this writing in itself, is something that has been developing over thousands of years, and that cultures have always borrowed from each other and taken, borrowed is not the right word, because when you borrow, you have to give it back. So maybe the borrowed is not a good terminology in this sense, but taken from each other. So I give you my script, or you copy it because you think it's useful, and then you change it to your own way. So for example, I mean, some of the oldest alphabetic writing systems were kind of born in the Middle East, what we call the Middle East, or now it's called West Asia, which is much better actually. But then, they were taken or adopted or copied by the Greeks. And then at some point, the Greeks wanted to switch the writing system's direction. So it's always been for thousands of years written from right to left. And then all of a sudden, the Greeks thought, it doesn't make sense. We want it to be from left to right. So then all the descendant scripts that came, which is the Latin and the Cyrillic, et cetera, that came from the Greek, write in the opposite direction. So, is this, symbolic to people, like cultures kind of coming, facing each other in a conflicting way, or is it just coincidence of history? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But, for me, these are interesting questions. And I think that as a designer, I think you only become, whatever your nationality, whatever your culture, you only become better from knowing about other cultures and knowing how they do things differently and how they do things that kind of are similar to the way you do things. It's like, it's like a different, tonal level, but it still is music.
So I want to ask a question about these 4 books that I see on the screen that are published over the course of like a decade and a half. The first being published in 2001, Arabic Typography, a comprehensive source book.
Yeah.
The last of which is Arabic Type Design for Beginners in 2013. And then obviously there's been a lot of other work beyond that. So if I think about that 20-year span, 2001 to 2021, how much has really changed? Because if that was a comprehensive source book at the time, how much bigger or more comprehensive would the new version of that book have to be? How much has really changed? And how much of the sort of the DNA of the Khatt Foundation do you think is at play in those changes?
Wow, that's a difficult question. I mean, how much change is easy. How much of the DNA of the foundation is tough one. I think the first one, the first Arabic typography was like I said, was my own curiosity. I did it for myself. I did the book for myself and my students. So there was no Khatt Foundation. There was no pretense. I didn't know whether, I didn't care whether it was going to be successful, quite frankly. And it wasn't for the longest time. It still is a unique resource, but at the beginning, I was not known writer. Nobody knew me. Nobody, pushed very hard to publish this book. We didn't have social media to kind of like put it on Instagram everywhere and make publicity for it easily. But I recently made a new version of this book, and I've been like postponing it for the longest time because I'm like, I don't really feel like going back to this old work. But it ran out of print, so we had to make. And in the meantime, we have now as an publishing arm for the foundation, so we have a publishing house. So we thought, okay, it's maybe a good moment to make a new edition. And then I had, precisely the question you said. So I thought, should I really go back into this and make like a really different book? Or should I keep this book because this is a kind of historical document and just go through it and, retouch here and there things that were not accurate, maybe elaborate on things. And in the preface of this book, I said, the second edition that came out 20 years later, is that this book really stops at a moment where Arabic typography or type design was really in its in the phase of starting to develop as a really fully fledged scene. And I didn't want to, because then I thought, if I'm going to make this and include everybody that has been working since, then I have to make a completely new book. Like it's no point, it's just, it has to be like a second, like part 2 rather than a second edition. So that was a tough one, and I went through it and I kind of, and also what was difficult is that, of course, 20 years down the line and all the work I've been doing since, I know so much more than when I started this book. So it's also kind of like how much do you change from the original? Now, the second question about, how much influence did the foundation or how much contribution did the foundation make towards this development? Because nowadays you have like really many more people involved in Arabic type design, whether they were Arab or non-Arab. There's more people teaching it. We give more workshops. Some of the people that came to our workshops became specialized. Some of them just learned about this. So I think we have contributed absolutely. we're not the only ones, but one thing that I think the foundation did contribute is putting this issue on the map, on the map of designers from the region, but also designers all over the world. So people are curious to make Arabic type design, even when they're not Arabs. And also what is more important, I think, is that we kind of, the discussion and through a lot of advocacy and writing in newspapers and having articles and being vocal and opinionated, et cetera, I think we also created a generation of commissioners, so people that were working, like clients that were actually aware and sensitive to the fact that they need to nurture this field and they need to commission new typefaces and they need to buy fonts and they need to respect copyright. And then when there's a market needing this kind of thing, then there's more likely to be more developments and more people and more talented people involved, because then, they can make a living out of it.
Yeah.
So yes, that was the long answer to a short question.
Well, one of the things I wanted to get to is that at least in the last year, I've interviewed a lot of typographers, and there seems to be a fellowship among typographers that is different than other adjacent art forms. When I speak to architects, they're not like, oh my God, I know, like we're all friends. Not all graphic designers seem to, they maybe know each other, but it's not the same. Something about typographers in the Arab world, it seems like they all know each other. And there is this bond and fellowship, like we're all fighting the good fight. Like this is there's something righteous about the work that you're doing. Is that imagined? Am I wrong about that? Or does it feel that way on the inside?
Well, I think it's a small community. And we are, I think also what the foundation provided is kind of like a place where we all meet each other in some ways, in virtual way, but sometimes in real ways. And it is not a lot of people, it's a small community. And there is also this feeling that there's so much to do and there's so much to explore that we are kind of like, like comrades. We're all fighting the same battle, sort of, each one in their own way. And that's really very important. I think that I would say the generations before, there was far more consensus in their perception of how you design Arabic script, and they were kind of more rule oriented. And I think within younger with this generation, with designers nowadays, there is definitely a more they all get proper, like they're really serious about it, and they all take their own stand and they pursue their own way of doing the scripts and doing design. And I think that's the wealth, and the thing that we've been from the start talking about is this lack of diversity. Like life is so diverse, we are so diverse, the Arab world is so diverse, we even speak different dialects. So why is all our fonts looking the same? It doesn't make sense, right? And also why not explore, the Arabic calligraphy heritage is so rich with variations and inspiring variation. Not that you have to take anything from there and copy it, but you can copy the spirit, you can actually explore things and be free in the way you draw the letter forms, and Arabic allows for that. It's a kind of very malleable script. So why restrict yourself? And you see that, I think what we tried, at least what I tried with when we curate these typographic matchmaking, is to explore also not just how to bring cultures together, but to also explore the wealth of cultures that already exist in the Middle East, or in the Arab world, I would like to say, not the Middle East. The Middle East is tricky. Tricky terminologies, my God.
So I want to talk about this matchmaking project, and maybe you can just explain to the listeners in a sentence or two what the purpose of this project was, and maybe just what is this project, typographic matchmaking in the city. Walk us through what this idea was.
Okay, there is the idea again is to create multi-script families, because but focusing at least focusing on Arabic and the Latin script, because that's what's mostly used in the Arab world. So the idea was, if we bring two scripts together, they have to work together. How do we kind of create a typeface that works well in several languages, so that if you're designing on a book that has 2 languages in it, that they are kind of look like, harmonious together on a page. Now that's a very wide question and a very, and throughout, so we've done this project, this kind of research 3 times for 3 different briefs. So the first one was very simple, like let's make a bilingual font that has Arabic and Latin in it, and that could be used for publication or for, kind of just mostly for publication, but not all the design came out like that. But also for me, there's an important cultural element in it of bringing designers from different cultures with different specializations to collaborate, so that they teach each other, learn from each other, and they leave with some product that is bigger than the both of them, together. So the second time we did it, I wanted to explore, this idea of actually how do we combine on top of this idea of making cities more human-centered. So a city, you see typography in a city, you see signs, you see objects and things, but they're always very pragmatic. They're always like signs of, either street signs telling you you're on this street, or go left, go right, or they're advertising or so forth. But they are never really. They're never really personal. You can just, as much, if you don't need to, you can easily ignore them, and they're not directed to you. There's no emotional thing. There's no poetic. They're not friendly necessarily. So I thought, it would be nice to bring back some of the traditions of, Islamic architecture. And also in Amsterdam, you have that sometimes, these buildings where the architecture, especially in the 1920s, where the architects actually carved sometimes poetry, sometimes actually the name of the building was carved into the building in the same aesthetic, and that gave the face of the city something very humane, not like some plastered sign, neon sign over a building that had nothing to do with it. So that was the starting point of this project. And the third time we did this project, we really worked on bringing, then we added to the Arabic and the Latin script, the Tifinagh script, which is the script for the Amazigh languages, that is starting to be taught and to be revived in Morocco among Berber communities. So the idea again there was to kind of bring these 3 scripts together that belong in this culture and that are never really designed together. And often when you see examples of them in the environment, they're not at all harmonious. And somehow, like maybe that reflects also a little bit the way people don't want to be harmonious as cultures. And maybe it's nice to make that gesture and say, like, try to work together, live together, and kind of, be able to be together without, kind of worrying about your identity being dissolved, because or worrying about, it's like we're having a conversation, you and I, but, I don't become you. Like we can find a way to speak, but I have my opinions, you have yours. Maybe I convince you on things, you don't convince me on others. But so there was this idea of like, opening up a conversation. And so we did this project and we kind of tried to include, Moroccan or North African designers and Spanish designers to work together. And then we looked at that history that is kind of like dense and problematic. So in a way, these projects are about typography but we're not a font design studio. We're not making fonts. We're actually, I'm very interested in the process and the conversations that go into the making of these typefaces. So, so when I invite designers, I carefully select them. I carefully think about who would work with who, how can I facilitate this process. We go through trips together, we travel together. Sometimes, in the last project, we actually spent quite a lot of time together. And you build a relationship and an environment of trust where people can, disagree but still be friends, which is difficult in the creative process because it's already stressful, to create something new. And when you have three teams and then you are still together critiquing each other's work, sometimes it can be very competitive, which is of course a little bit stressful, but it's also part of why the work in the end turns out really good, because everybody wants to be better. So it's also, it's very tiresome and intense process, but the end result is always really good. And I think that from all the experiences I've had with these three projects, even when things were not smooth, you only develop friendships after that. And it's not that the people that I invite, I know very well from the start. I know their work. I know a little bit about them. Some of them I know better than others, but not really. And then, they become like you said, comrades or friends and I don't think that typographers are nicer than others. I mean, I don't think so. I think it's not that. I think it's just that the work itself, the experience itself builds these connections. So I think if architects worked like that together, they would probably also become friends or become solidaire with each other.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to go to the quick Q&A. My last question is a little cheeky. So in 2011, the Rolling Stones wrote an article in which they listed the Khatt Foundation as one of the 20 designers who will have the biggest influence on the design over the next decade. It has been a decade.
So, okay, that's not me who wrote this, but I found out through somebody else. I didn't even know that they wrote this.
I guess my question is, I'll ask you the actual question. Looking back at the past decade, what influence do you think you may have had on the past decade? And going into the upcoming decade, what are the major challenges that you really want to attack? You really want to tackle, maybe?
I think I don't know. It's very hard for me to answer this question. I think that, again, the major influence was to actually initiate real interest in Arabic typography and type design, and to kind of put forward, ideas that might have been popular, might become not popular. People have issues with them. So it's about discussion. And I like, to be subversive. So I think we got a lot of this, we got a lot of discussions. And I think that it's what I would think the contribution is that to launch, this awareness that people need to work on this. And I think that now it's going very, people are working, and I keep discovering new designers in places that I didn't know, like I didn't know before, or I didn't expect to see designers working on type. And there's a lot of experimentation of all kinds. So I think that, I'm happy to have contributed something. Now, where I would like to tackle in the future, that's really tough. But I think I would like to explore more, be like you, explore more conversations, direct conversations with people, and, work more on looking at also not just type design, but typographic design in general. I think that part needs a little bit more, that part of the field is also, can very easily become sidetracked by branding, like global branding and so forth. So there's a lot, I think, to be talked about there. And I would like to, the more I read on the news and the more I hear and the more I work, get involved with other kind of cultural project, I feel like there's more and more need to bring back the role of design as a possible way of, politically and socially being engaged, not just, servicing big corporations. I think that's probably our challenge in the future, and it's something that I would like to work on.
Okay, we're going to do this quick Q&A. I'm going to try to cut you off if you go too long, because I want to make time for the Q&A from the audience. Okay, what are you reading or watching right now?
Yeah, I don't have time to read very much, so I read short articles in the New Yorker, my favorite. I try to read short stories because that makes me relaxed. And I regrettably watch stupid things on Netflix that I don't want to talk about.
Don't regret it. We all do. Okay, who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Oh, nobody. Not in the past, not in the present. Maybe in the future, I'd like to shadow somebody who's going to show me like how the world has changed, where maybe we're all colorblind and we're not like so racist and have issues with each other.
Okay. What do people most misunderstand about your work?
Yeah. It's a difficult one. I think that often people, because when you talk about this project, Matchmaking Arabic and Latin, they often misunderstand, and they always think that we are trying to make Arabic look like Latin, or that every time you make innovation and you come up with some kind of modern approach or a different approach, that you are, imitating the West. One, I have a problem with that very much, because that's not what we do, and that's not what, all the designers I invite are completely not doing that. They don't do that. They don't want to do that. So I think this idea that, if you enter into conversation, you are making concessions, that's a bad thing. I mean, design is all about concession, and it's all about, negotiation and negotiation with limitations. But also, I think imitation is not a bad thing either. I mean, sometimes you have to imitate to improve. Like, we learn language by imitating. We learn everything in life by imitating, and then we improve on it. We think, that's not good enough. I can do it better. I can, take your hairstyle and improve on it. I can steal your clothes and just redesign them. So that's something that's a bit of a misinterpretation. And also, I think they all assume that, I'm an outsider, that I don't know what I'm talking about because I have a funny name and I don't ever talk about my design work. So then I'm not even a designer. So how should I say, how should I? So the people that know me don't have any misunderstanding, but that's a general thing that's kind of like comes back once in a while that says, you're ruining the Arabic language or script or culture, which is, comical. I'm doing everything but.
It's a remix, the subtle art of the remix. Okay, whose work do you admire or are inspired by? And I'm sure there's a long list, but if there is one or two you want to shout out.
There's a long list, like who? I think I've had many fantastic teachers that inspired me. So my teachers, I'm not going to list them.
Okay.
But I mean, there's a lot of people whose work I admire, and but I can't think of one person or two.
Okay. All right. There are 3 questions. I'm going to read all 3 of them. The first one comes from Donna. She says, totally unrelated, but if you have time, can you please elaborate on why, quote, Middle East is tricky terminology and why the Arab region or the Arab world is preferable to you, if you have opinions on that?
Oh, totally. I think the Middle East is problematic because the Middle East is a perspective from a European perspective that says, we're in the middle between the East and Europe. So it's like, it's a relational geography, not a real geography. And the Arab world for me is more interesting because the Arab world means it's the whole world. It's everybody who's Arab wherever they are. So it's not a geography. It's actually a cultural affiliation.
Yeah. Okay, Selma asked, what are you wanting or expecting to see from future designers?
I never had children, so that I don't have expectations of people. No, I mean, I hope that I think that I see it, actually. I don't have to think too much about it, but I think I see it, and I hope it will continue. I see that future designers are really much more going back and evaluating, what design means and how they can use it as a tool for their own society. And I feel that that's a really very positive development, and we should nurture it more. And I expect that, you know, that they don't let themselves be kind of like torn between, you know, political jargon, but just be honest to themselves on what they want to do and do what they feel like doing, and not be like, you know, burdened by responsibility of that they have to represent a culture or they're ambassadors of sort. I think they have to be true as artists and designers that want to express themselves, that want to explore things, and that should not be afraid of making mistakes or making a fool of themselves once in a while. It's okay. It's a good thing.
Great. Faye, take us away.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, Faye.
Hi. So my question today, I'm so happy that I got to like see you and hear you for the past hour. But my question today is to do with design imposter syndrome. You know, as you know, we've both been educated in the West, and we've lived a lot of, you know, our lives to Western standards. How does the Khatt Foundation tackle that? You know, having a standard that's Western, however, you know, as Arabs and as, you know, having Arabic typography, where does that standard come? And what about, you know, your views on design imposter syndrome?
Okay, Faye, thank you for the question. It's a tough one. I have a problem with the word Western and Eastern, because I think that there has been through history all sorts of exchanges. So what is Western is also could have been also originally African or Eastern or whatever. So I think that we should not try to put these labels. I don't feel that, I don't know what you mean by Western standards, but I think for me, the foundation is really based in the Netherlands because I live there, but it has nothing, you know, it's not about like Western standards, whichever they are. I don't know what Western standards are really. I mean, I think that maybe this attitude that I have, and maybe if I'm interpreting you right, is we both were educated in the United States, and so we believe, and I don't know if it's necessarily true, but we believe in being able to freely express yourself and to kind of like make your own rules as you go. And that is something that maybe to a various degree is not possible in societies in general, but less so maybe in some parts of the Arab world, and in some nations in the Arab world. And so I think if you mean by that this is Western standard, then yeah, I believe that, you know, that you should appropriate everything that suits you from any culture you come across. So if it's in the West, or if it's in the East, or if it's in the Far East, or in the North, or in the South, then you should take it and use it. I think I'm very much in this idea of you should mix things and take parts that suit you for your purpose and use them for your own advantage. So as a foundation, I mean, we focus on Arabic and Arabic design because that is what interests me, and that is what the goal of the foundation is. But it's not about, you know, imposing one standard over another. I mean, when we did the project in Morocco, and we learned so much from the Tifinagh script and from, you know, the Amazigh culture that I didn't know at all about, not very little, and what I knew was very superficial. And that was, if you're always if you enter any project or any endeavor in your life, or any design project, with such an open mind of like, okay, I don't know, you know, accept that you don't know, that your standards or what you perceive as the way to do things, if it could be, it's okay if somebody challenges it, and then it's okay if you say, I don't agree with it. You know, I'm Arab, but I prefer to have Swiss design in my work. Let's say that's okay. You know, I don't have to impose it on other people. So I think as a foundation, I think we, and the whole general attitude is that it's really about opening up and exploring and really making connections. I think that we have a lot to learn from each other in both directions. I hope I answered you well. I kind of tend to ramble sometimes.
Huda, I have a final question on this note. Is there work being done to create multi-script fonts and that include like Filipino and Bangladeshi and Armenian and Sri Lankan and other languages that are so prominent in this region? Maybe they're not as, they're so prevalent, but maybe not as prominent in this region. To actually communicate these ideas and to acknowledge these hundreds of thousands, millions of people who live in this region, who also interact with Arabic.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is not, there are people working together to create large font families. I think what we started as a trend and kind of exaggerated that, you know, become like the standard now is that you invite people from these different cultures and they all produce, you know, then they all work together to produce different scripts that fall under one font family, one design in a way. And that's up to them, this group of people, to decide. And so I think for Armenian, there's, you know, I know Khatt Foundation who's done work that is bilingual, but I'm sure there's also Hrant Papazian and there's other people. I don't think there's a kind of Armenian font foundry that does that. With the Indic script, there is. I mean, in India, there is big design studios that are specialized in that, and they collaborate with Western or European designers or American designers to create, you know, Latin versions of their scripts. So I don't know if they also produce Arabic. It's possible. So I think it depends on the commission. I think there is one studio in London called Dalton Mag that does, you know, they're specialized in making big font families for really huge multinationals. And there they use all the, like, depending on these, you know, let's assume they're doing something for Nike, and Nike sells all over the world, and then they want their fonts, you know, in all these languages, in all these scripts and all these languages from around the world. Then they commission them. And that's kind of, I think that's a unique design studio that's like, I don't know, 50 people or something. I mean, it's huge, working on these scripts. And then within that context, there are different people specialized in the different scripts, because you can't be good at all of them. It's difficult. I mean, it's complicated. You can't be good at one, you know, it's hard enough. So to make all these different scripts is difficult.
Huda, thank you so much. We just hit an hour. It flew by. Thanks for taking the time, for sharing your work and your perspective with us. For those of you who want to connect with Khatt Foundation, look them up online on social media. They're all over the place. Check out their books, their workshops, and see you all next time. Great to see so many of you here. And I pray that you all have good Wi-Fi and good weather this weekend.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being good listeners.